We want to welcome Lindsay Kuehn. She is the lawyer for Flag, and we are really happy to have her here, and she's gonna give us some advice about using copyrighted, or the fact that we should not be using copyrighted products in the things that we make. Welcome, Lindsay.
Thanks, Shelley. You gave away the ending. So hello, everyone. As Shelley said, my name is Lindsay. I'm one of the attorneys with the Farmers Legal Action Group. And for those of you who've been a part of the organization for a while, I was here a couple of years ago giving a similar presentation. So I tried to add in some new things, but it might be a recap for some of you. I suppose that's the benefit of Zoom. You can tune out as you see fit. But I'm really excited to be here. For those of you who don't know about Flag, so we're essentially a very small nonprofit law firm, and we're based in St. Paul. Our mission is to keep family farmers on the land, and we do that in a variety of ways. But one thing I'm personally just excited to be a part of is working with the cottage food producers. And I think Flag has been working with you all for several years now, and I really enjoy it. So I'm always excited to be invited to participate in your conference. And so today, as Shelley mentioned, I'm going to be giving an overview on intellectual property law, which sounds maybe pretty boring, but hopefully is relevant to what you all do. And specifically kind of the big question of, whether it's okay or when it's okay to use a copyrighted image in some form and sell it in one of the things you make. So to that end, I'm going to start by trying to share my screen here. Okay, is that showing for everyone? Okay, I'm gonna go with yes. And I want one caveat before I begin. So I am not an intellectual property law attorney. So this is not my expertise, but fortunately I know people who are, and I am able to do the research. So I want to just say my goal here is to give you an overview of the law. So hopefully you understand the general, like the basics, and also, where if you have a specific question, when it might be a red flag or when you might want to look more into an issue or speak to an attorney. And, unfortunately with the law, lots of times things are not black and white, and there is a lot of gray. And so as you'll see, part of this presentation is really trying to help you understand where the risks are. And I think I would venture to say probably all small business owners, it's a lot of balancing risk and determining for yourself what risks are worth taking. So my goal is just to help give you some background information so that you can make more informed decisions. Okay, so I will dive right in. So when we talk about, intellectual property, the three things that I think are most relevant for cottage food producers are probably copyrights, trademarks, and then to a lesser extent, trade secrets. So I'm going to try to kind of give an overview of each of those and then dive into maybe some examples that are more relevant to your work. And I believe, and I think you've been doing this through the conference, but if you all have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat, and I'm sure we will have time at the end to talk about those. And if I don't have an answer in this moment, I will be sure to keep a log of the questions and get back to you all. Okay, so the first one, and I think maybe the most probably applicable, is copyright. So what does it mean when we're talking about copyright? A copyright is a property right in an original work of creative, tangible authorship. And I bolded those because each of those words is actually really important to understand what copyrights protect. So as you can see at the bottom, we're not talking about facts or ideas. So it really does have to be an original and creative sort of creation. And it's also important that it be tangible. So if you have a brilliant idea, but it stays in your head, that idea isn't protected under the law as a property right for you. So it does have to take on some tangible form. And so some examples of this. There we go. So you can think pretty much any kind of creative, tangible thing you can think of. So poetry, novels, even architectural designs or songs, plays, sculptures. I didn't know until this presentation that for those of you who've been to Chicago, the Bean is actually called Cloudgate. That was new to me. But that is something that can be copyrighted, and even software programs. And so for each of these things, again, it has to be creative and your own. So, you know, there's a picture of ET up there, right there. I don't know how many stories have been written about aliens coming down to Earth, and that general premise might not be copyrightable, but as soon as you kind of give it your own flair, so a glowing finger and maybe a big head and a long neck, you know, the more distinctive it is, the more likely that it is that something is protected as your creation. So that, you know, copyrights, it's a really broad genre. And I think the other very, you know, something useful to know that many of you might realize, but you don't actually need the symbol. So you can see on here the little copyright mark. You don't need that mark to gain protection under the law for your creation. So oftentimes we see things and it will have the copyright, and that does serve a purpose. It puts the public, it puts all of us on notice that someone is, you know, saying that this is my creation and you can't use it or copy it without permission. But in general, as soon as something is put into a tangible form and it fits the requirements of originality and creativity, then it is protected. And I guess I should say what I mean by that is, you know, if you created something, even if you didn't register it and get the copyright mark, if someone copied it, you would have the right under the law to take them to court. So that's what I mean when I say it's protected just upon coming into existence. So then the question comes, you know, okay, well, how long are these creative things protected under the law? And, you know, this isn't too important, and you can see over time it has changed. So the current duration is the author's life plus 70 years. So if you were to you know, design a cartoon today and it fit all the characteristics, then it would gain copyright protection. You know, it would be protected until you pass, and then 70 years after that. Previously, so anything before 1978, it was roughly 95 years was the duration of a copyright. And then essentially what this means is that anything that was created or published before 1928 is now in the public domain. And when we say something like a copyright is in the public domain, what that simply means is that you can use it freely without any concerns that someone would try to take you to court, or without concerns that you're violating someone's rights. So, for example, here's a list of several kind of famous characters that are now in the public domain. I think most of us will recognize these: Robin Hood, Pinocchio, Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, Bambi, Winnie the Pooh. But the important thing, and you can see at the bottom, I think it's funny how much publicity Mickey Mouse can get, but on January 1st of next year, so the original Mickey Mouse will technically be in the public domain. But in a minute, we'll talk a little more about this. But really, all that means is that the Mickey Mouse from the 1928 cartoon, so the black and white cartoon from Steamboat Willie, will be in the public domain, not all Mickey Mouses. And so the same goes for a lot of these other characters. And like I said, I'll explain why that is in a moment, but I think it is important to recognize that it's that initial version that gets protected, right? And that's when you start counting the clock for how long something is protected. Okay, so moving on, just a brief overview of trademarks. So if copyrights are about tangible, creative, you know, creations, trademarks protect words, phrases, and symbols. And really they're about identifying a product or a service. So we think about things that have commercial value. So slogans and logos can be trademarked. And you can see, you know, the Google logo, Amazon, and then we've got lots of slogans: just do it, got milk. All of those things can be trademarked, right? They're identifying a brand basically, and it has commercial value. And, you know, when I was a few years ago, really diving into this, I was surprised that there's even a protection under trademark called trade dress. So you can protect essentially the colors of a brand. And so the Cheerios packaging with its yellow and red, and even the silhouette of, the original Coca-Cola bottles. So those can be trademarked so that you can't use the shapes. And, similarly to copyright, so trademark protections can exist whether or not you have technically registered your trademark. So I think the common marks that we see, and they're on here, there's the little TM, and that's a very common one, but that actually designates something that's unregistered. So it doesn't mean there aren't protections. It just means, the person who created it or the company, they just haven't registered it with the Patent and Trademark Office. So they still have rights, and it's still important to know that if you see the TM, that you could be violating their rights, and they could take you to court, if you were to use any of the trademarked slogans, symbols, color schemes, I suppose. And then when you see the R that I think many of us have seen, that means that it has officially been registered. So that's the difference, but they are both referring to trademark law and trademark protections. And then in terms of duration, so how long is something protected? It can be forever as long as it's in use. And in a way that makes sense, if we think of trademarks as protecting a brand that has commercial value, if that brand is continuing on, then the trademark protections continue on. There is, if a brand, so if something goes out of business and it's no longer sold, no longer used for a certain period of time, it can lose that protection. But in general, as long as it's still, in the public eye, it's being used, being marketed, it will have protection under the law. Okay, so then finally, the third category, trade secrets. And I think this is a phrase we hear a lot, and pretty much the definition is what I imagine most everyone thinks. So a trade secret is something that has a commercial value. So again, with all of these protections, it's mainly because artists and makers and creators, oftentimes, and you all, right, you have a living based on what you're creating. So these protections exist because there is a value in the marketplace for what is being produced. So with a trade secret, it has to have a commercial value. It has to have been maintained in confidence. So we're talking about secrets, like the name suggests. So if you, go talking about it out in public, post things on the internet, a website, Facebook, then that you would lose your protections. And finally, being that it's a trade secret, it's something that is not known by competitors. So as long as those three things are true, then it can be protected as a trade secret. Okay, so I wanted to dive into some examples, and Mickey is sort of the cliche, but also honestly, it seems like the best example. And with Mickey coming into, or the original Mickey coming into the public domain next year, it felt good to stick with. So I think the reason that I first presented here was the question of, is it okay to, a customer comes to you and they want you to put Mickey Mouse or another, maybe a Marvel character or Wonder Woman on a cake? Can you do that and sell it? So, as is, the short answer is no, you can't. As long as it is an image that is copyright or trademark protected, you can't without permission. And again, I'm guessing pretty much any, movie character, anything that is out there in existence, I would just, if I were you, I think the safe thing is to just assume there's copyright protections, right? Or trademark, Mickey being a trademark for Disney. So using the image kind of exactly as it is, that would violate the law, technically. Then I think a common thing people think is, okay, well, if I switch it up a little, so, maybe I'll put Mickey in blue pants, or I'll change some feature. Maybe Mickey has muck boots on. I don't know, just brainstorming here. So, that definitely, you're adding your own creative spin, but the answer is still no, that would be illegal. And the reason for that is that when something has gains copyright protections, there's actually this bundle of rights that the owner, the creator has. And really the main right that you have is the exclusive, meaning you are the only one who has the right to reproduce, to adapt, to distribute, and to display that work. And so importantly, this includes a category of things called derivative uses. So when we think of translations or movies that are made from books or plays that are made from stories, right? Art productions, anything like that, the original owner has the rights to those. And that is why a moment ago when I was talking about how Mickey is technically entering the public domain next year, the reason it's just that Mickey is because all of these other versions of Mickey are derivative versions, right? So the original owner has the right to take Mickey and put blue pants on him. They're the only ones who can do that. And so it gets kind of tricky, especially as we see, a lot of movies these days are just sort of adaptations of older stories. And so those characters, even though the original one might be in the public domain, if you want to use the modern version, you are still likely violating someone's copyright rights. So those are derivative uses. So then the question is, okay, is it ever okay to use something that's copyrighted or trademarked without getting express permission? And I think the biggest exception is what's called the first sale doctrine. And so as you can see, that basically says that, after the first sale of an object or a copyrighted object into the stream of commerce, it is free, it is available. So I think I used this last time and it kind of ages me, but it feels very on point. But when we used to have movie rentals, right? That's how you were able to rent a movie and take it home, or right. So once the first copy of something is made and put into the marketplace, the theory being that someone already paid to use that copyright, then it's free to do with it what you will, or why we can, resell things on Facebook Marketplace or things like that. But the important thing to know about this exception to copyright law is that it really only applies to that specific object. So not things that you would make from that. And so I wanted to include an example that seems like it could be relevant. But for example, let's say you go to the store and you buy like a cake pan or a cake mold, or maybe a cupcake mold, whatever it may be. So in this case, I found we've got marble. Okay, so you get that and it's like, okay, well, I will take that and then can I just bake some cakes in it and sell those? And unfortunately, the answer is no. So you could take the pan and in theory, you could resell the pan or, do whatever you want with the pan itself. But if you wanted to make something from it and sell it, you would still need permission if those, the images, in this case, these marble characters, if they're copyrighted. So, and then I had one more, and this is a little more of a gray area, but what about a cake topper? So I think that question has come up, and if you think about it, you buy the cake topper. You're not doing, you're not changing it. So on one hand, you have an argument that I'm just continuing it in this stream of commerce, but I think it would really depend what a court would say. And again, this matters if someone brings you to court, right? And I'm aware of that, but my job as a lawyer is to just try to explain to you what the law is. And I actually, for this specific example, I spoke to two different lawyers who work more in the field of intellectual property law, and they each had a different answer. And I think that is very telling. And I think ultimately what it comes down to is the level of risk you're willing to take. So it would be much riskier to buy the cake mold pan and make your cakes in marble characters and then try to sell them at the market. That pretty clearly violates kind of the current law and copyright protections. If you were to use a cake topper, it might be a little less risky, but it very well, a court could determine that you are taking that and sort of turning it into something new. And, again, if we think about, for example, the purpose of trademarks, right, in part, It's about brand identification and avoiding confusion. You know, if there's any confusion that someone could think if you sold this cake here with the Marvel characters, that you were, you know, part of the Marvel brand, that would be an argument why it would violate the law. And so I imagine all of you, or some of you in your minds, might be thinking, okay, I live in a small town, my market's not very big, I don't think anyone's going to be confused. So that's where, you know, the risk assessment comes into play. But technically you are taking a risk because it could be found to be unlawful to do so. Okay, so cake topper example. So then there's one other category or one other way that you can use copyrighted materials and works without violating the law. And I don't want to go into this too much because I don't know how relevant it will be in your work, but I just want everyone to be aware that it exists. And that's something called the fair use doctrine. So what this doctrine really says is, under certain circumstances, you can reproduce or use a copyrighted work, and if someone were to take you to court, you could use it as a defense and not be found to violate someone's rights. So for example, the main categories are commentary, criticism, education, and news reporting. So for example, why I felt comfortable cutting and pasting Mickey into this presentation was really, I thought, well, someone wanted to take me to court, you know, this is for educational purposes. I have a pretty good reason why I'm doing it. I'm not trying to sell anything, right? So, so these are the, or why, you know, when you watch the news, right, and you can see reproductions, that's why, because these are kind of exceptions, the law. And, you know, what a court will do, and I'll just go over this really quickly, is they sort of look at these 4 factors. So what is the purpose for which you're using it? Again, is it for education? Is it for reporting or commentary or criticism? The nature of the work, the amount that you're copying, you know, am I just going to play the entire Frozen film for you all this morning without permission, you know, or am I showing like a still shot, right? So that's a factor. And then, you know, the big one again, because as I said before, a lot of this is about, you know, people's right to sell what they create. So the impact on the commercial impact on the market. So if you ever got taken to court for something and you felt like, you know, you were using it in one of those categories of information like education or reporting, you know, then the court would look at these factors and determine whether you actually violated their rights or not. So again, that's probably not too relevant, but just thought I would throw that in there in case it's useful. Okay, so another example that seemed maybe especially this season for Vikings fans, but okay, so can you use, you know, the picture of the Viking logo? And I know this is pretty specific to bring up the NFL, but they have such strict rules. So I did want to emphasize, you know, on their website, and this is a quote, you know, so NFL marks, so these would be trademarks, and they include, you know, the shields, certain words, so Super Bowl, Pro Bowl, and then logos, team names, nicknames, colors, symbols, helmet designs, uniform designs. I mean, they really are protecting their teams. And one thing that was surprising to me was that, you know, generally speaking, you can always ask permission from someone. If something is copyrighted or trademarked, you can ask permission. And if you get permission in writing, you can go ahead and use it. The NFL, however, expressly states that they do not offer licenses, so permission, to small businesses or hobbyists, AKA cottage food producer would probably or would not be able to get permission to use those logos or images. So it's a pretty specific example, but because they are so strict, I thought it would be good to point that out. And then, you know, I think the last thing here, sort of the interplay between copyright and trademark. So let's jump ahead a year. We're now in 2024. That original black and white Mickey is in the public domain. You're excited to put it on a cupcake, but the reality is Mickey is still trademark protected. And so the question becomes, okay, maybe you could use that Mickey and not violate copyright law, but Mickey's still trademarked. So this is where, you know, there's gray area, and but that isn't very gray. Like Mickey is trademarked, so technically you'd be violating trademark laws. So I feel like that's kind of the bummer there. Also wanted to go into, there were a couple questions maybe 2 years ago that came up that some other folks might have. So I wanted to touch on those briefly. And one of them was about recipes. So is there a way, you know, I imagine many of you, right, are makers, you're creating things, you're baking things. And is there a way to protect, you know, your best-selling recipe? And unfortunately, there's not a lot of, at least in intellectual property, the short answer is probably no. And the reason, so in the beginning, when I mentioned trade secrets, right, the key is that you have to really diligently protect it. So if you do that, if you don't, you know, if you never talk about it, don't post it anywhere, your competitors, they don't know about it, it's possible. So I guess I should say, not no, it's possible. But in this day and age, I think it gets pretty hard to really protect something to the degree under the law that it would be needed to be considered a trade secret. So your best bet, though, is probably trade secret, because copyright law is very clear that it does not protect ideas, procedures, processes, or methods of operation. And even on, you know, the website for the Copyright Office, they say that the listing of ingredients or contents is not subject to copyright protections. So they are pretty clear that that a recipe could not be copyrighted. However, one exception to that is that, and you know, we've all, sure everyone here, you know, has a recipe book collection, that it is possible to copyright a book, but that really depends on how original it is. Because again, a recipe book is a compilation of recipes. So if we know the recipes themselves may not be able to be copyrighted, if you put enough creative flair and spin and energy and narration into the book, some courts are likely to say that, okay, that crosses the threshold. And I think one court, or one case I was reading about, that their test was, you know, do the recipes, are they accompanied by substantial literary expression? So if you really take the recipes and you kind of, it's not about the recipes in isolation, but it's about this book that you're creating, then you're likely able to copyright that. So the recipes were one question. And then the other one that came up last time was about nutrition labels. And I think, you know, a lot of people wonder, can I say something's gluten-free if it's gluten-free, or vegan, or, you know, whatever the case might be. And again, as we talked about, right, so copyrights don't protect facts. So saying something is gluten-free would not in and of itself violate any sort of copyright laws. When we think about how we express that, so right, is there a logo that we use, you know, then you could run into situations where trademark protections might apply. So for example, this is the logo for certain products that are certified gluten-free, right? So you couldn't, without permission and without being certified, just put that logo on your product. And so, you know, it is possible to create your own, right, and to put it on, but the huge, and I should have made this in larger lettering, the huge caveat to that is that then you get into this whole world of FDA and other labeling rules, and I am not an expert in that at the moment. So I would just caution that, you know, there are certain things that if you say, you are committing to following the rules of the FDA and all the food safety. So that is the big caution. And actually, you all might, I don't know if you have a session this time on labeling, but I just want to warn you of that. So you can absolutely, you know, you can use the words, you can have your own logo, but just make sure you're following other labeling rules. So like everything, it gets complicated, unfortunately. Okay, so I spent a long time talking about, or trying to just give the overview of what these different areas of the law what they mean and what it means to violate them. But the question that I imagine people are wondering is, well, what difference does it make? Like, what happens to me if I do use Mickey and I am violating someone's copyright rights? So I think the first thing is to figure out, are you? So generally the work protected. Again, something doesn't need the copyright mark or the trademark, symbol to be protected. Really just think about, is this a brand logo? Is this a, popular, creative, tangible character, right? And am I using the similar likeness? Am I copying it? And then are you using it improperly? So am I selling it versus am I giving a presentation on it, right? So those are kind of, I think, 3 questions that if I were you, I would just ask myself when you're starting to just weigh the risk and question whether you're violating the law in any way. And then the next thing is, okay, so here's what could happen. Most cases, and I caution, sometimes it's no fun to be a lawyer, but in most cases, you're probably just going to get what's called a cease and desist letter. So, if, for example, if Disney heard that maybe you're selling at a big market in the cities and they heard about it, they might just send you a letter that says you need to stop selling your cake, or else, XYZ, we'll bring you to court or we'll fine you, or who knows. So you might get a cease and desist letter. In a worst case scenario, someone could bring you to court and they could sue you. So they could sue you for what's called a temporary restraining order, meaning just something to get you to stop doing it. Okay. But, people can also sue you for damages, and damages is just the legal word for money, right? They can be actual damages. So if someone is claiming, I created, well, they're not around anymore, but I created Mickey and all the derivatives, and it's my right to sell Mickey, and you have made a profit off of my creation. So a court could grant them actual damages, meaning the value of the money that you made on the products you sold that were protected, someone else's protected creation. And then in some states, under some laws, there are what are called statutory damages, which are simply, the law might say, if you violate the copyright protections, you will owe X amount. So you don't have to prove profits that were made unlawfully or anything like that. It's just under the law, it says, you get X amount if you were the victim of this. And then finally, sometimes people can seek attorney's fees, which, unfortunately can be a lot, and that's determined on a case by case basis. So again, I'm not trying to scare people. I just want you to understand sort of the range of things, right? So it can range from a letter to being brought to court, but it can be serious. And I think many, many more people than we realize are probably violating a lot of copyright laws. And that's why when I say it's everyone's decision to figure out how risk averse you are. So the real sum of all of this is, if there's something you want to use, get permission. And sometimes that's easier said than done, but you can contact the owner, the author, and try to get a license. There are websites, and I didn't include them this year because I find them honestly so confusing, but there are websites where you can look up copyrights and trademarks. It's just, they are complicated, and especially for the trademarks, because you might look up one, if you looked up, for example, the Minnesota Vikings, it's like every aspect is trademarked and it sort of gets confusing. But if folks do want the links to those websites, I would be happy to put them in the chat if you just want to tool around on there. But again, just remember, even if it's not registered, it doesn't mean it's not protected. So that's not a foolproof way of knowing. And the very last thing I'll say, and then I feel like I've been talking for an extremely long time, but there are some things that are kind of in the public commons, so to speak. So I'm sure many of you have seen websites where there are images that are just copyright free, and certain artists will put things and just allow it to be in the public domain. So you can also kind of Google for those things if you're looking for images that don't have any protections. So that's another way to kind of get creative. So, okay, well, that was the bulk of what I wanted to convey, and I know we do have some time for questions.
Yes, can you see the questions in the chat?
Yes, I am pulling them up now. Okay. So the first one I see was, if I have an idea for an item, can I copyright a drawing, but not the item itself? So I might ask, I don't know if Francis is here, I might ask a follow-up question. So the drawing, again, as soon as you create it and it's original and, you know, it's yours, it's technically protected, right? Because you don't need to register, you don't need to do anything. So that image itself, I would argue, probably carries its own inherent copyright protections. But when you say not the item itself, do you mean like if it's on a cupcake or? Okay, well, maybe Francis, if you're there and you want to come back to that, I'm happy to dig in deeper. But I think for sure the if you create a cool cartoon or something, that absolutely should carry copyright protections. Okay, the next one, if the TM superscript has never been used, is there still trademark protection on that name or image, or would that fall under copyright? So this, it's really interesting because lots of things can be both. And, Mickey being the classic example, Mickey is a trademark of Disney. When we see Mickey, we think of Disney. So the superscript, that mark, doesn't need to be there. So that means it's just unregistered, but someone's kind of putting you on notice that this is their brand. So even if you don't see the TM, that doesn't mean it's not protected. And the difference, again, the big difference between trademark and copyright is that trademark is about brand recognition. So, let's say, your business logo, that's about your brand recognition. Now, maybe in your logo, you have this really awesome character, and that character, like Mickey, could be both copyrighted and trademarked because everyone knows when they see that character that it's Lucy's Lollipops. Bad example, just, but you know what I mean? So some things could definitely carry both protections, and it's not as much about what the mark is as about what the object is representing. So if it's just this creative piece, a character, that's more likely to be copyright. If it's really about your brand, so your slogan, about selling something, then that's more likely to be trademark protected. Okay, in regards to the NFL, do we have to be careful of our copy when we are advertising? For example, if we are selling cookies that have nothing to do with the NFL, but we say in our copy it's for the Super Bowl, is that an issue? That is a very good question. I was just thinking back to that slide where I pulled from the NFL website, where technically, they claim protections on the word Super Bowl, but this is an area where I would say on the spectrum of risk, you are very low. If you're not selling anything that has, NFL teams on them or their colors or nicknames or things like that, but you're essentially just saying Super Bowl is coming up, right? Technically, this is where I'm going to put my legal hat on. Technically, yes, maybe that's a violation, but the level of risk would be much, much lower than if you were to use any sort of icon or logo or slogan.
But Lindsay, isn't that kind of just using it in a sentence, like making a comment?
Yes, so exactly. But what's odd about the NFL, and I can, do some more digging into this and get back to you with maybe a more concrete answer, but what's odd about it is that they trademark even the word, and that feels weird. Like on their website, in that quote I pulled, it was the word Super Bowl, the words. So I can do some more digging. So that's why that seems overly, I imagine a court would never, well, you should never say never, but that's why I'm saying the risk is so low. But technically, they're saying that those words are theirs.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're right. And if you can read between the lines of what I'm saying, hopefully, very, very low risk. Okay, so if someone wants a Mickey Mouse face on a cake, will that be an issue? Yes. So Mickey, both copyrighted and trademarked. And so currently you would be violating both of those if you put that on a cake and if you didn't get permission. Okay, oh, here we've got another, the Super Bowl, so this was about, I have salsa for sale for the Super Bowl. Can I use the word Super Bowl? Can I say the big game? Absolutely, you could say the big game. I will do some research into this because Shelley, I think it seems this could not violate it. It's just their warning on their website is so broad. So I will ask around to the folks I know who are experts in this area, and Shelley, if it works, maybe I'll shoot you an email and then you could pass along to folks.
Yeah, and I can put that on our Facebook page. The thing is that you hear people doing Super Bowl sales in literally every advertisement.
Exactly.
Where it gets to the game. I can't imagine that the NFL is going to go after every single solitary person.
And especially, again, we're, in all of this, if we're thinking it's about, sadly, money is really what it comes down to, for what, and the nature of cottage foods having a cap on what you can sell, right? These are small businesses. So I think you are exactly right. But now I'm curious what the technical legal answer is.
Right.
But yes, I would not, if I were any of you, I would not have many concerns over that. Okay.
The next.
How does the use of a business name? So, you can register your name. So it's not, it's not just the images and logo, but it's important to know that with trademarks, it can be, anything that's used to identify it. So for some people that could be the name, which is why you can look up, I think, when you register as a business to see if other businesses have your names. But for the trademarks, could even be, as we said, like certain slogans that people then identify with your business. So it's just the trademark's a broader category than just the business name itself. So it would extend to anything like images, logos, slogans that people identify with your business. Okay, I'm thinking of making an item like a necklace, and the drawing could be an artistic interpretation, or if I'm going to have multiple made, it could be a construction drawing. Okay, so, and Shelley, I'm thinking, is the question, is that design, can you protect the design? Do you think that's what the question is, Shelley, there?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, so if we think back to that definition of copyright, right? Is it a, original creative idea? Is it in a tangible medium? In this case, yes, both the drawing and the creation of a necklace itself. So yes, I would think that could have copyright protection. Absolutely. Both the drawing and the design, right? Because even architectural designs can be protected. So. Okay, Mary Jo asked, going back to the cake topper, if I go to Michael's and I buy an Elsa cake topper for a cake that I'm going to sell, that is illegal. And this was the one where it's really a gray area, and it is safer than, again, buying like a mold and baking a cake, an Elsa cake and selling it, but you still do run some risk. And this was, again, where I said, I talked to 2 different intellectual property lawyers, and they each had different interpretations of this. And, what I think makes this whole area of the law even more complex is that oftentimes you don't know the answer unless you get brought to court, and a judge sits there and weighs all of the factors and determines whether you violated the law or not. So, there are some things that we know are illegal, like putting Mickey on the cake, that's going to be illegal. This is an area where it's about the risk you're willing to take, right? And so I wish I could give you a very clear answer, but I can't. Because you are, on one hand, you're taking that cake topper and that's free to continue in the stream of commerce, but you are putting it on a cake. So someone can argue that you're turning that into something else. So, right, that derivative use that they have all of the rights to, you're turning it into something else by putting it on your cake and selling it. The counter argument to that is, I just took this thing I bought exactly as it is and just plopped it on my cake. I did nothing to it. So those are kind of the two arguments that a judge would have to decide on. And I think courts are often split on these things. So it does just get complicated. And that's why at the end of the day, it's how risk averse you are.
So what I do when somebody wants a specific item like marble or Mickey Mouse, or the cake toppers, I have them buy it themselves. And then I put it on the cake. So I'm not selling that. I'm only
So
selling
you sell the cake and then they put it on, or you put it on, right?
or I can even put it on for them, but I didn't sell them that. I just sold them the cake.
I do the same thing. I just recently did it with a John Deere cake.
That is very clever. Nice. Any other ideas out there what people are doing? I'm curious now.
So if I go to Target and buy, some figure that's copyrighted, and then bill the customer for it exactly what I was billed or paid, that doesn't qualify. It has to be them buying the cake topper.
So I think what this really comes down to is, does the cake topper become part of something new that is marketed and in commerce, right? So that's where it gets a little tricky. And that's why, when you buy the mold and make a cake, that is definitely a different product than the mold, right? The cake mold is one thing that is now free to be sold and moved around in the world. And there, the copyright protection is no longer attached to it. But you take that and then you make cakes that then look like those characters. Well, that's a derivative use. That's a new creation of those characters. And so those are still protected. And so I think what Shelley and Jen are saying is, they are selling just a cake. Like that's what they're selling. And then a customer is gone and they've bought this object, which we all can go and buy any sort of cake topper we want. And then that gets put on after the sale has happened. So it's like, it's not perfectly black and white in that, but I think that's a very creative way of navigating this.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And as far as the Barbie shaped cake pan question, they sell so many dolls that look like Barbies now, even in the dollar store, and just don't call it Barbie.
Yeah. And that's the thing about when we talk about kind of generics, right? Even some things like, I think Kleenex, right? It became so used that it lost its trademark because I don't even know it's a tissue paper. I mean, I call any tissue is a Kleenex, right? And I think that, so when something becomes so known, like it almost, the word Kleenex now is synonymous with tissue paper.
Or
so
Jello.
Like what was that?
Or Jello.
Or Jello, right? Yeah. So some things, so with, a generic doll, you probably have an easier way of getting around violating any sort of copyright, as long as it's pretty generic. It's harder with things like superhero, things that are really conveying, which I imagine a lot of your customers want, a very specific character from a specific movie, right? That's where it gets a little harder to say, no, this is a generic mouse with, big ears and red pants. Okay, what about derivative names like selling freeze-dried Skittles as frittles? Wow, there is no shortage of good questions on here. So so I want to make sure, Kate, I understand this. So you would take Skittles that you buy and freeze dry them? and then resell them. Okay. My inclination, I'm going to make a note on this just so I'll correct myself if I find out I'm wrong, but my inclination is that that would be unlawful. And the reason is because you're taking it, again, a person's rights, remember that bundle of rights. You have if you create the Skittle, you know, the Skittle is more of a trademark than a copyright. So that's interesting. I'm going to ask on that one. For things like copyright, right? You have those bundle of rights, so you get to transform it, adapt it, do whatever you want to it, and you're the only one who has those rights. Trademark is slightly different, so I'll make a note on that and get back to Shelley and Jen, and they can convey things. Okay. Oh, and then, maybe Francis was clarifying fashion dolls. Okay.
So if someone wants a Mickey Mouse face on a cake, will that be an issue?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, Mickey's probably going to be tough, frankly, for a long time because, you know, Mickey is Disney. And so I think even as, you know, more versions of Mickey get into the public domain, you know, where you're not violating copyright law, you would still have to be concerned with kind of a trademark issue. Can we call M&M? Oh, yeah.
Hi, Lindsay. So I just wanted to check. So if like a customer wants like a Mickey Mouse face on the cake, so I either do with a fondant or icing. So will that be an issue then?
So can you repeat that last part? So your customer wants Mickey on a face, and then what do you do?
So so customized cake. So I do it, do the Mickey Mouse like from a fondant or icing. So will that be an issue then?
The short legal answer is yes, that would be violating copyright, and in the case of Mickey, trademark laws. And
Okay.
so, yep. And again, you know, this is where, what is the consequence? Would I get a cease and desist letter from Disney? Okay, you know, with those, it's nice. You get the opportunity to just stop doing it. Or are they going to bring me straight to court? And those are, you know, I'm not, with my lawyer hat on, I can't tell you what's going to happen. It's just, you know, those are the range of possibilities of what could happen. And I am hoping to help you better understand which things technically violate the law and which don't. And then, you know, each of you are in different situations about who you're selling to, how much you're selling, how much you're marketing, right? And so you'll weigh those risks, but I'm just trying as best I can to just let you understand where the lines are, where the gray areas are, so that you can make kind of the best decisions for your own businesses.
We have had a few cottage food producers who were given cease and desist letters from Disney.
And, you know, it would be, I think I remember you saying that. So that's useful to know, right? And I would be curious where those people were selling, you know, if it was smaller towns or cities or, but that's helpful to know. So, and it makes sense that the first course of action, right? Lawsuits are expensive. So if you're a cottage food producer, it seems likely that the first course of action would be that someone would give you a cease and desist letter, but that doesn't have to be their first,
Right.
you know, course of action. But
Well, in this day and age of social media, when everybody puts everything out there, especially now with all this hashtag business, so it connects you to these things, you're even more out in the eye of the public.
Yep.
Can we call M&M cookies an M&M cookie?
You know, I wrote that one down too. You know, because M&M obviously trademarked, but again, this kind of goes back to saying like the Super Bowl, and every M&M cookie I've bought is called an M&M cookie. So I want to ask that of someone, of an expert, and get you the right technical answer. But yeah, I will.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Lindsay. I got a question.
Yeah.
shifting things a tiny bit from usage to our own personal or our business, like logos and stuff. So I'm really, really proud of my logo and branding that I did myself.
Mhm.
I thought in the past about registering it, but earlier when you mentioned that you can put the TM on there for free, you don't have to, or not for free, but without registering. Can you talk a little bit more about that if for usage on our own logos and stuff?
You mean like how you go about doing that?
Well, like number one, is it really as easy as just putting TM on and not registering it? And if
You
so, how do I go about doing it? Placement, size,
I
other stuff.
I can send you more information, or if you want to message maybe Shelly like privately your email, then she can send it to me. I think, you know, the thing with registering it is you want to make sure it hasn't been registered. So that
Right.
is probably a situation where, you know, you could look on the Patent and Trademark Office website, and I can put those links, you know, that might be helpful in there.
Yeah, so
Um,
you are asking if you wouldn't mind putting it
okay.
in the chat.
Yeah, and you know what I'll do on that is maybe I'll write up something short with the links, so you have a better understanding of how to go about doing that. And I could
Yeah.
send that to Shelly and Jen in the next day or so. Would that be okay? Is it, Shelly, is it easy for you to convey like a follow-up, or is that going to be complicated?
No, I think it's okay.
That should be easy. Lindsay, would you be okay if once you write that up, I actually put that underneath our resources on our website? And just put it on our website?
I
With
think so. We'll see.
the
Yeah,
link?
why don't we chat about that? But I don't see why
Okay.
not. But yeah, that is a great question. And there's a lot of resources on how to go about doing it, but you would want to check to make sure it's not registered. And
Yeah.
again, you know, I think the benefit, and I think why a lot of people do put like the copyright symbol, and that is you're just putting the world on notice. So you're sort of, so no one can claim ignorance, right? Like, oh, I didn't know that was your brand or your creation. So there are a lot of benefits of indicating when you know, when something you believe is meets that criteria. And if you do formally register it, then you're, you know, the government is essentially saying, yes, you do meet the criteria. We acknowledge that. So yes, I'll do a short write-up and we'll figure out a good way of getting that to you all.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
One thing, my husband has a food blog, and over the years, he's taken some really nice photos, and they get, by his followers, they get put on Pinterest and things. And he's had some of his photos stolen by other people who use them without giving my husband the credit, you know, or linking back to his food blog. And so in one case, we, you know, he actually did send a cease and desist letter. One of our daughters happens to be a patent attorney.
Oh, fabulous.
But anyway, and sent a cease and desist letter and demanded that they, you know, take the photo down. But anyway, all of that to say that some people here, some of these cottage food producers have got beautiful photos on their websites, gorgeous photos. And, you know, sometimes you just might want to check to make sure that other people aren't stealing your photos and using them for their purposes, you know, whatever.
That's, you know, and as you were talking, and I don't know how ridiculous, I'm just spitballing, brainstorming here, but part of me wonders, because as you said, did the cease and desist letter, first of all, did that work?
Yeah,
Okay.
you know, not at first. The person continued to use it, and the photos weren't taken down. But then, well, finally, what Joe did was he contacted the host,
Okay.
of that site, and you know, showed them the cease and desist or whatever, and then they were the ones that I think actually took
Okay.
down the photos.
And I think I know we only have 1 minute, so I just wanted to say one quick thing on that. So, I mean, that's an example of where, because a lot of times, if they didn't pay attention to that, your recourse is having to take someone to court, and that's
Right.
expensive and it's time consuming. So
Right.
I think thinking creatively about, you know, if you know that you have photographs that you care a lot about and you want people to give you credit for that, you know, even even stating something clear, like email this address if you would like permission, or something to help people. Because I think a lot of times we just get, everything's on the internet. We get so used to copying and pasting. So if you can make it easy for people to reach out and ask permission that you can deny or grant, right? Like that's maybe one thing to consider in those situations too.
Right.
Not to say everyone would follow that, but just then there's really no excuse for someone to say they didn't know. You're making it easy so that they know who to contact to ask permission, because that can be hard in some situations when it's not as easy as one person's creation. So
Mhm.
just some food for that.
And just one more note on that. I know that I and several other cottage food producers, we put a watermark on our pictures. And you can get I use the add watermark. It's free. It's a free app. Thank you, Lindsay, for being with us, for answering.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Hopefully it was useful. And I will follow up. I made a list of things, so I will follow up on those in the next couple days.
Okay. We have Pam Lehman with us today to talk about bookkeeping for our tax preparation, which is coming up way too soon. And I believe she's a friend of Jennifer's. Jen, you want to chime in?
Well, I met her this last week. And she works for the Minnesota Small Business Association out of Marshall, correct?
It's the Minnesota Small Business Development Centers.
Development Center, yes, that's what they call it. Yep.
SBDC.
Yeah, and we had worked trying to get the Small Business Development Center to speak last year, and with COVID and changes of things, it didn't work out. And I had reached out to a couple locations, and they were so great to get back to us. And so we chatted a little bit, and here we are.
All right. So Jennifer, you're gonna probably have, I don't know how to get my presentation on the screen. Do you know how to?
Shelly's gonna share the screen with you.
Oh, perfect.
So that
Okay.
you can use it.
All right. Sounds good. Hello, everybody. Go ahead.
One thing, quick question for you. Would you like everybody to hold their questions till the end and write them in the chat box, or to ask questions as they arise?
I think we should kind of take them as they come up. There's sometimes a lot of questions about bookkeeping. If people have
Okay.
questions, let's kind of incorporate it in. And if it's a long answer, maybe we'll push that to the end.
Okay, sounds great. So we'll have people raise their hands then, and then you can answer them.
Sure. And it'll come up in the chat. Is that how it will?
I'm not sure how that, I think it just
not
shows up
either.
next to their name. So yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll do our best. If somebody's not getting their question answered, we'll save it till the end. I'm very technology challenged at times when it comes to the virtual presentations. So hello, everybody. My name's Pam Lehman. I'm with the Southwest Minnesota Small Business Development Centers. In my presentation, you'll see the area that encompasses, and you can figure out what part of the state of Minnesota would be the resource center for you to go for services, but with the small business development centers.
Okay, I'm gonna interject because we can't see your screen quite yet. You'll have to
Okay.
go down and share it on the big green button.
Yeah, where it says screen share, I gave you access to it.
Okay.
Kind of in the middle, and you click on it and then choose. Yep.
Is
Perfect.
it there? Now
Perfect.
I don't see it, but let me see if I can rearrange things here and get the presentation. Is it full screen, or are you seeing everything? There we go.
We're seeing everything, so you just need to do the slideshow, and then
I'm trying to figure out where I can switch to that here. Sorry. There we go. Is that better?
yeah, we're still seeing your notes. So I don't know if you want to close out your notes or not. That's up to you.
Okay. I think we're gonna just go, because otherwise I could take forever doing this, guys. Sorry.
No worries.
It's fine. Don't
It's
worry.
perfect.
It's the age of Zoom.
It is the age of Zoom, and this is the first PowerPoint I've done, and I can't even remember how many years. So I hope that the details I'm putting on here are helpful for you. I'm going to try not to be one of those speakers who reads verbatim what is on the screen. But if you've not heard of the Small Business Development Centers, often referred to as SBDC, we are located throughout the country. The services we provide are provided to new, existing, startup, or people who are even considering going into business, and we provide our services at no charge. And we do provide a variety of services. Probably the most common things we help with are business planning, cash flow projections, financial analysis, and help with marketing and employees. But there's lots of different things that we can help with. And so if you as a cottage food business owner are looking for some guidance and some help, we would love to be able to, help you out as well. And I'm speaking on behalf of all of the SBDCs throughout the state of Minnesota. My experience, I've been in helping businesses for more than 15 years now. 8 years with the Small Business Development Centers. Before that, I did economic development with Lacroix County, which is way over on the southwest side of Minnesota. Right over here, the little light blue box is our southwest region. So if you live within those 18 counties, if you reach out to our office, you will be assigned to one of the counselors in that region. And we will begin working with you one-on-one to help with any business questions that you might have. At the end or other places in this presentation, I'll have more contact information for you. So where do we start? Bookkeeping, a lot of times we get into this industry because we enjoy what we do. We like to cook, we like to bake, we like to can, and people go, oh, you should start selling that. And sometimes we get into this without really going into it with a business mindset. And so where should we start to make sure we have good bookkeeping practices in place? Now, what you did in 2022, we can go back and fix that if we need to. But at the very least, now that it's January of 2023, we've got a brand new year starting. At the very least, let's get started on the right page for this coming tax year, right? The 12 months go very, very quickly. So the first thing you want to always think about is having dedicated bank accounts. You never want to intermingle your personal money and your business money together. From a bookkeeping standpoint, it just makes things so difficult to know, especially in the food service industry. If you go to the grocery store and you buy groceries for your home out of the same checkbook that you go to the grocery store and buy your products to purchase to create your end product you sell to a customer, how do we know which check to the grocery store is a business expense and which is a personal expense? So if we have business bank accounts, checking and savings, and I'll explain to you why I want you to have a savings as well as a checking account. If you do all of your transactions related to the business through that account, it will be so much simpler at the end of the year to do your bookkeeping, even if you do it on paper. Now, sometimes people will say, yeah, but I just need one or two things. Guess what? The checkout people are there to help you the way you want to purchase. And so if that means you have 2 orders within your cart, you go through the process of checking out for your business, purchase those items, write a check, or use your business credit card or debit card, and then you'd have them do another transaction for your personal items. It really isn't asking that much of anyone for you to be able to do that. So we want a checking account for sure. And that is where we're going to make all of our purchases. But even more importantly, it's where we're going to deposit all of our business receipts. So when I'm talking about business receipts, I'm talking about every penny that you collect from the sale of your items. It doesn't matter if that was 5 cents or $5,000, whatever the amount is, those dollars should all go into that account. And if there are expenses that need to be paid from the money that you've collected, then the money goes out of that account as a check. I also want you to have a savings account, and here's why. One of the other things that sometimes people aren't prepared for is that you are in business now, and the government expects you to report every penny that you collect. And then you can also, when you do that, then report every dollar that you spend. And then when whatever's left at the bottom is your profit, and that's what you have to pay tax on. And depending on what state you're selling in, that may even include needing to pay sales tax. In Minnesota, we don't have a lot of instances where we pay sales tax on food that we purchase, but there are times. And if you have items that you're selling that are taxable, your savings account for the business is where I strongly recommend that clients collect that money, put it into their checking account, and then immediately calculate how much of that was sales tax and move that over to a savings account. We're an at-a-glance world, and we love to use our debit cards or go out and look online on our bank accounts and see how much money is there. And if we do that at a glance, it could look like we have a lot more money available to our business than in actuality we do. If we've collected sales taxes and not set those aside, it could look like we have money that we can spend for making new purchases, buying new equipment, repairing things, when really that money is owed to the tax entity. So you want to make sure that you're setting that money aside so you don't end up in trouble with your sales tax submissions. The departments of revenue are not forgiving people. If you have a deadline and you have an amount that you owe and you have to pay it, and if you're 1 day late, there's going to be a penalty. And if you're multiple days late, there's going to be a penalty plus interest. And it's at a very high rate, depending on the entity or the state that you're dealing with. So we don't want to make that mistake. We want to make sure when those dollars are due, we have them set aside and that we get those paid in on time. The other reason you want to have a savings account is that if you are wanting to compensate yourself for the time you're inputting into this business, this is a good place for you to move that money, or a good place for you to move that money to set aside for paying your self-employment tax. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit more later, but that's why I want you to have 2 business accounts, okay? You also want to have a place where you're filing all of your documentation, okay? You want to keep copies of all of your invoices that you're sending out to customers. So that means if you're doing things on paper, making sure it has a duplicate, or that you make a copy using your copy machine. If you have a digital bookkeeping system, those invoices are saved within your system. You want to make sure that you're keeping copies of all your receipts. When you go to the store, when you order online, you want to make sure that you're keeping those business receipts there as well, okay? Keep copies of all of the checks that you receive. This is a bookkeeping practice that in the business world is very, very common. At the end of a day, a lot of times in the business world, before the deposit is made that goes to the bank, a copy of each of the checks received within the business is put on the copy machine and a copy is saved there. You then have a visual copy of that check received. And so if the deposit doesn't go through, if the check is returned, or if for some reason your bookkeeping is off and you didn't think it was paid, or they thought they paid you a different amount, you have documentation of that. You also want to save all of your bank statements and anything else related to your business expenses, purchases, or income. Okay. I'm not sure, Jennifer, I'm hoping you're going to yell at me if you see that there's a question that I'm missing.
Yep, I'm watching for it and I'm watching for hands. If anybody wants to unmute and ask any questions right now, they sure can.
Sure.
Mary Jo just made one thing that I've seen so many small business owners think is that they think they're paying the sales tax. No, you've collected the sales tax for the state and you're obligated to pass it on to the state. Yeah. So it's really
Yeah.
not your money is what she's saying.
Yep. Yeah, you're a pass through. So in the state of Minnesota, we have 6.875 sales tax. And some cities as well as some counties have additional sales tax that you need to collect if you are doing transactions within their boundaries. But at the very least, if you have a taxable sale, if it's $10, you need to collect $10 and 6.875% on top of that. So your transaction is going to be $10.68. Okay. And that 68 cents is not yours. You are the keeper of that tax dollar until you submit your report to the state of Minnesota and then submit that tax to the state of Minnesota. There's a different tax rate in different states. I'm on the western side of Minnesota, and so there's a lot of times I have clients who have businesses within the state of Minnesota, in the cottage food world industry or in the food industry, and they will cross the border and go to farmers markets or go to other places where they're selling their products. They then have to charge the sales tax appropriate for the city where they are located. And there's kind of a lot of involvement when you want to cross lines and state lines, I should say, and want to sell your products in another state. And that's a whole nother conversation. But sales tax is, Mary Jo, you're absolutely right. It's a big mistake that a lot of people make. They spend that money and then realize they needed to pay it in, and now they don't have the funds. The other thing when we want to get started, and if 2022 was your first year in business, I want to say that when you get done with your training today, you want to hang up the phone and get yourself a tax advisor if you do not have one. You want to have someone help you do your business taxes. I don't have a lot of people that have very good luck going to some of the more chain type tax preparers, the ones you see on the television. They're there to help the people who work W-2 jobs, where you go to work and at the end of the year, they send you a W-2. You maybe have kids and you maybe have a couple other things for extra tax credits that you're going to get back. They're wonderful in that situation. And the same can be said for some of the online do-it-yourself tax software. That's all wonderful if you are simply a W-2 employee with some of the more standard expenses related to children and things like that. But you're now a business owner, and we sometimes have to take the time to change our perspective of how we look at ourselves. We're not just somebody out there selling something that we like to do. We are now in business. And so you're going to need help with tax preparation. You're going to need help deciding what things do I need to keep? What receipts are appropriate? What things can I spend my business money on? And so talking with them is very important. So if you don't have a tax advisor, I strongly advise you to get one. The tax, when it's time to take things in for your taxes, I don't know how often this is going to happen in the cottage food world, but if throughout the course of a calendar year, if you have someone who provides a service to your business, I'm thinking maybe you have someone that comes and maybe cleans your equipment for you, or maybe makes regular deliveries for you. When you pay them, unless they're incorporated, you need to issue them a 1099 at the end of the year for any amounts that you pay them. And it's required if that dollar amount is $600 or more. And so that needs to be filed and prepared by your tax preparer before the end of January. So in 2022, if you had anyone that provided services to your business, this is not products that they sell to you. This is services that they provided to you that were at the cost of $600 or more. You need to get information to a tax preparer so they can issue a 1099 and get that off in the mail to them before the last day of January in 2023. Okay. The other good thing that a tax preparer will help you with, they'll help you monitor and do the submissions for sales tax if that's appropriate for your business. They'll also help you plan for upcoming income tax considerations. Whether that's the self-employment taxes I mentioned earlier, the submissions for FICA, the submissions for Medicare, your state income tax, and your federal income tax debts. They can also, if you were at a point last year that your tax debt was sufficient, they can help you calculate what your quarterly estimates should be for the upcoming year. So you don't have that big bill to the IRS and to the state of Minnesota early the following year. You're paying them a little bit at the time, somewhat similarly to what would happen if you were a W-2 employee, only you're doing it on your own. The other thing they can talk to you about is when your business is profitable enough, maybe there's ways that you can take some of your profit and put that into a retirement account, and those contributions can help reduce the amount of tax you might owe to the federal or the state government. Okay. So, there's a lot of things to consider. And then we need to decide, what do we do with what we have? So you've gotten a bank account or bank accounts, all the money that you receive. Go ahead, Jennifer.
1 second, I'm just gonna, you were talking about taxes, and Cindy Hale mentioned here, which is right too. We want to make sure we include that there are also county, municipal, and other sales taxes that might apply depending on where you sell it here in the state of Minnesota. And the Department of Revenue sales tax site lets you set up multiple locations, and we'll calculate the relevant sales tax for each location. Then when you file or pay that tax at the end of the year, those locations will show up and you enter the gross sales for each location, taxes are calculated and you pay it.
Yes. It is, and I would guess that most of the cottage food industry is going to pay annually for sales tax submissions, but there are thresholds based on numbers at the state, and if you go to their Minnesota Department of Revenue website, it will tell you. But if you cross a sales threshold, taxable sales threshold, then they will change you to paying quarterly. And if you cross another threshold, they'll transition you to paying monthly. But the sales tax are always needing to be collected when appropriate, and she's absolutely right. There are counties that have sales tax, and there are also cities and municipalities that have sales tax on top of the state sales tax. So you have to collect for all of them and keep that and submit when appropriate. And so that's when where the record keeping gets really important. You need to know what invoices you had. I'm going to pick on Hutchinson because I know Hutchinson does have a city sales tax. So, if you do 2 sales in Hutchinson in a year, you're going to have to have collected that was taxable. You're going to have to keep track of how much was sold taxable within the city limits of Hutchinson and make sure that you collected appropriately. If you did not collect appropriately, guess what? They don't care. If you only collected the 6.875% and you owe for the city or the county tax, that comes out of your money. because even if you did not collect it, you owe it. So good questions. Keep them coming. Thanks, guys. Business bank accounts. All right, so we've got our business bank accounts, and what things do we put into our business checking account? All money received for items sold should be deposited into this particular account. And that's cash, that's checks, and that's any digital payments. So digital payments would be credit cards, things like Venmo or other ACH payments or credits. And I often get the question, well, do I have to put the cash in? The IRS says yes. Every dollar that you collect is reportable. End of story. The checking account is also the account where you're going to pay all of the business expenses. Okay, so that's what you're going to use your checking account for within the bank. Now, if you do not have a federal EIN, you may not be able to establish a quote unquote business bank account. And if that's the case, if you're operating under your social security number, then you'll need to open a different personal bank account. There are rules in the banking world that they cannot classify your bank accounts as business accounts unless you have a federal employer ID number, an FEIN. And if you want one of those, then that's a good thing to consider, and then you would be able to get a real business bank account. But I want for sure that you have separate checking and or savings account for your business. Okay. How many people, I'm just going to ask a question because sometimes that'll get people a little more involved here, but how many of you accept digital payments, credit cards, debit cards, Venmo? I know there's other processes out there.
I do.
And is that going well? Do you add an upcharge for the transaction fees?
No.
I consider it the
increased-
cost of doing business, and yeah, so.
Correct. I just increased my total amount of my product to cover the additional costs.
I think that's the smart way to do it. I think we're getting to a point in this world where there's less and less or fewer people using checks and cash. Well, some people will tell you there won't ever be any cash in the world, but I have a hard time believing I'll see that in my lifetime. But I'm pushing 60, so maybe that's true. Maybe after my demise, maybe we won't have cash anymore. But digital payments does come at a cost, and that's very smart of you to be planning for your business to absorb that. And so those people that pay you by cash or check, that's just additional profit for you. Mary Jo, are you asking a question? I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I tell my customers that I don't want cash, because then I have to go to the bank and make deposits and yada, yada, yada. So I encourage just electronic payments. And that way I get that when it comes to filing taxes, I've got a paper record of that.
Yeah.
Gail,
No, that's good idea.
sorry. Gail Olson put in the chat box that she collects transaction fees, but how she does is she adds the transaction fees to Square, and then she posts it for her customers to see so they can choose about whether to use Square or not.
Yes.
So that she gives them a choice.
And you have to do that legally wise. You can't add a surcharge to an invoice if they use an electronic payment if you have not disclosed that previously. And and maybe it's my age, right? I would prefer, just because I don't carry a lot of cash and I never carry my checkbook anymore, I would prefer that you, whoever it was that said they just increase their price for their services. And so if people pay digitally, that is a cost of doing business. I prefer that. I feel like otherwise I'm being penalized that I'm using my credit card. And, you know, honestly, yes, there's a fee, but credit card payments don't bounce. Checks bounce. You know, gosh, when I do use cash, I was even using a $20 bill the other day and went into a store and they were marking it. So, you know, there's enough bad bills, counterfeit bills out there that no matter what size they are, people are trying to pass that. And I don't want you to end up with any of that either. So any other questions on collecting payments or what counts as revenue for your business?
So might I ask a question? This is Deborah. And if so using the credit cards, which I do, but someone mentioned in the chat that farmers markets there's a lot of cash transactions that still happen. But since the transaction fees for credit cards, since those are costs of doing business, those are then deductible as an expense, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
they
so we
are.
have to keep track of that then.
Yep.
Somehow.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
How do we keep?
most of the time, how it works with a Square or something like that, you know, if your transaction, you know, is $10 for what you sold to the customer, Square then gives you the $10 minus what you owed them for the fee.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
So
Right.
you can't take that twice, right?
Yeah.
If you count the actual cash you received as, we'll just count it as 3%, right? So if you charge $10 and you receive $9.70 from Square, you claim the $9.70 as revenue. You can't count that 30 cents as an expense again.
Oh, you'd have to say $10 in revenue and then separate out all the little 30 cents
Yes.
or whatever.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also, getting back to the sales tax, you have to be careful that the sales tax you collect should not be included as your revenue.
Oh, yeah. Well, it has
Yeah.
to be. You have to figure out, yeah, how you're doing your bookkeeping, right? If you count sales tax in your revenue, then you have to declare your sales tax in expenses, right? And then you have to make sure you paid that out.
Right.
You know, an electronic bookkeeping system, which we're going to talk about next, will definitely keep those things separate for you.
Right.
Okay. Savings accounts. So why do we want a savings account? We want this as a place to save money. Like I talked about earlier, for taxes, you know, make sure that you're, you know, putting the sales tax you collected there and planning for income tax payments. But the other place this account is really good for is if you have plans for your business to grow, or you just got started and you've been using a lot of equipment that you just had around the house, right? You didn't make any special purchases, but you know what, no matter how good that mixer was that you had when you started your business, you're using it a whole lot more than the average household usage. So it is going to wear out and need to be replaced. So your savings account is another good place for when we have extra dollars, let's move it over into your savings account as a reserve fund for the large purchases you might need in the future. That might be equipment. Maybe you're getting so busy you need a dedicated business vehicle. Maybe you're growing so fast you're going to need a storefront and you want to purchase real estate or need to make improvements to real estate. Any of those things that you foresee in the future for your business, a savings account is a really good place to set that aside. You still have access to those funds if and when you need them, but like I said, at a glance, when we look at our checking, those dollars are not there tempting us to maybe make an unneeded or impulse purchase that we probably wouldn't have made if those funds weren't right there in front of us. So let's talk about bookkeeping software. There's a couple different ways you can do your bookkeeping. We can do it, I'm going to say it, like I said, I'm almost 60. You know, we can do it the old fashioned way. We can do it on a paper ledger. We see less of that today, but I still, every once in a while, have a client looking to purchase a business from someone who's been in business for 40 or 50 years and everything's done on a paper ledger. Absolutely nothing wrong with it if you know what you're doing on a paper ledger, but it does involve a lot of math, and it does remember a lot of, I have to remember what that transaction was, right? If you aren't being very specific on your paper ledger. So that is an option. We see often more, if they don't have a dedicated bookkeeping software, they've developed some sort of spreadsheet, in a spreadsheet software. There again, it often ends up being more of a problem than a paper ledger. Calculations and formulas are not done correctly. Details and data aren't explained correctly in there. And you can struggle sometimes at tax time to figure out what was that expense for, or why did I spend that? But there are dedicated bookkeeping softwares out there. QuickBooks is probably the most common and very, very popular. It's very easy to use and fairly intuitive if you understand bookkeeping even slightly. And if you, as on the personal side, have always done a good job of doing bank reconciliations and managing your funds personally, you shouldn't have a lot of trouble using a software like a QuickBooks. And there are definitely others out there. I am not familiar with many of them in depth, but QuickBooks is something that a lot of times is what we will recommend that people find that software or something very comparable. QuickBooks is available in a desktop version, and it's available in an online version. If you're using, I think it was maybe Deborah talking about Square, Square definitely talks to QuickBooks, and with QuickBooks Online, it will do direct transactions right from Square into QuickBooks. It's very, very user-friendly from that perspective. And you don't then have to go back to your office after you've had a day of sales and enter details into the QuickBooks software if you've used Square for each of your transactions. But I would recommend that no matter what software you're looking at, the tax advisor that we talked about earlier, you want to talk to them. What are they most comfortable using? Because you want to make sure that you are keeping track of your accounts in your bookkeeping software, whether that's QuickBooks or something else, in the same format that your tax advisor wants them to be. And that will entail sitting down with your tax advisor and going through an entire list of what are expenses that are legitimate business expenses, and for you to understand what they're talking about when they use a term that is a legitimate business expense. So sometimes that means for people who don't understand that marketing is often synonymous with advertising, right? Your tax accountant may say, well, how much did you spend on marketing? So then in QuickBooks, you can create an account that says marketing / advertising. Your tax accountant then knows that that's a marketing expense. And you know that marketing and advertising are the same thing. So when you pay a bill to print your business cards, that's marketing or advertising. And then you classify that within your bookkeeping software as a marketing and advertising expense. No matter what software you're going to use, get trained. The cost of the software is usually fairly nominal. I believe that right now, QuickBooks Online, at the level that it would need to be for someone in the cottage food world, and to be very honest with you, for 90+% of the clients I work with, the base service of QuickBooks Online is really all you need. They will try very, very hard to convince you that you need more than that. But always remember, with these software, if you start at the base level, if you find there's things it doesn't do, you can always add services on. It's much harder to take them off. So always start with the software at the basis level that you can for a price. I believe the base price for an online QuickBooks subscription right now is around that $30 a month. You'll usually get the first couple of months at a discounted rate, and then the regular rate goes up to about $30. If you buy the desktop version, which is then, loaded onto your computer or your laptop, I believe that runs around $300. So if you think of $30 a month, that's $360 a year. If you think about, $300 upfront, it's all about the same. And that's a legitimate business expense. The software charges are a business expense. Okay. So get training on that software and then work with either someone during training or with your tax advisors, and make sure that when you set up that bookkeeping software, you get your company within the software set up correctly. If it's not set up correctly from the start and you don't know how to operate it, it's going to create more issues for you down the line. There's lots and lots of training out there. And if anybody has questions on where to find training, Jennifer, you're welcome to share my contact information, or I even have a list of software trainings that I could send to you that you could share.
That would be great. That would be excellent.
Yeah.
I am gonna, there are a lot of comments here
Sure.
about what people are using for different reports and fees and stuff, but I just want to, and there's a lot of great information here, so I encourage everybody to scroll down and read, but I want to read this one. I would just going back to the sales tax issue for just 1 second.
Yeah.
Another sales, and this is from Cindy Hale. She's with the extension, and says another sales tax issue to be aware of is that you cannot charge sales tax on food items, even if they are taxable to SNAP even if they are taxable to SNAP customers at farmers markets. So if you do these kind of sales, you cannot build the sales tax into the price. The state gets really mad about this and could put your market at legal risk of losing SNAP. So that's something to be very, very, very much so aware of if you're doing that. And there's something else when you're talking about bank accounts. Amy Camp says that her bank told her that she told me that checking was the only option for my business account.
Well, and if she does not have a federal EIN, maybe they let her open a business bank account without a federal EIN. She can open a personal savings account dedicated for the business. If the bank won't let you, open business accounts, it's usually because you don't have a federal EIN. And but when you do, there are business savings accounts. But if not, just open a personal savings account. And I'm sorry, I forgot her name already, but if it was for me, I would then tag the savings Pam's business savings, just so that I knew how to keep those separate when I looked at my bank accounts out there.
Yeah. Okay. Does that make sense, Amy?
Amy, sorry.
It's all good.
All right. When you have a bookkeeping software, it's really important to keep up on entering your data. And I will be the first one to say that 20 years ago, and my husband is a farmer, a very, very small farmer. He has only a quarter of land, and he's always had I always call it a real job. But before QuickBooks, before I had QuickBooks for my personal businesses, it was really easy to just write checks and look at the check balance, and at the end of the year have this stack of papers and spread it all out. And we're all, if we don't like paperwork, it's real easy to put it off. But it's really important to keep up with your business bookkeeping regularly. I would say do it every day that transactions occur. At the very least, do it monthly. Don't let a month go by that you get a bank statement and you don't go out to your bookkeeping system and reconcile all of your business bank accounts. This is going to give you the opportunity to see a lot of things that you may have forgotten about. You will make sure that you see how much you have spent on your cost of goods. You will see how much you've spent on your expenses and how much money is really left in the bank account. But even more important than that, your bookkeeping software will let you run reports of your profit and loss over any period of time. That could be over a week or over a month or over several months or a year. And being able to know if you're profitable, it's critical. Otherwise, why are we doing this? If we are not sure that we're profitable, why are we doing this? And the cherry on, no pun intended, on the cake is that at the end of the year, when you have a bookkeeping software, it will take you 5 minutes to do your tax preparation meeting, right? You're going to run a profit and loss report from your software, and you're going to send it to your tax accountant, and they're going to look at it. I'm not saying they're not going to come back and ask a few questions, but there will not be all of that headache and hassle and pulling your hair out and screaming and crying that can go along with getting ready for taxes. So let's talk about the difference between some of the terms that we use in our everyday life and in the business world. I have clients in the cottage food world who go, oh, I had a great day at the farmer's market. I made $1,000. You made $1,000 or you collected $1,000. There's a big difference. Revenue is dollars collected. It is not profit. Okay. So revenue would be all deposits received into your bank account. That's payments for your products, payments for your services. That's refunds, rebates, any other money that comes into your business bank account. But just remember, revenue is not profit. And depending on what you do in the cottage food world and how many different items or types of items that you sell, you're going to want to break out your items into revenue streams or revenue categories so that we can determine which of your revenue streams are the most profitable. We want to make sure that when we're producing and selling an item, we are getting the most money for the items that have the highest input for cost of goods and take the longest time to do because they have the most inputs. And if we lump all of our sales together, we're not able to evaluate that and understand how much we should be charging for each of the items or types of items that we sell. So some of the ideas that I came up with in the cottage food world would be revenues like cakes, breads, cookies and pastries, jams and jellies, canned goods, pet treats. I'm sure there's a lot of others, but those are the ones when I've worked with other cottage food clients, those are the ones that come to mind. And if you sell all of those things in your bookkeeping system, you should have a separate category for income for each of those items. Okay. So the technical definition of revenue is the total amount of money brought in by a company's operations. It is the financial gain through sales and or services rendered. So that's revenue. It's what we all strive for. The more revenue we make, we think the more profitable we are. And the better job we do of breaking out our revenue, the better job we can do of making sure we are truly profitable in our business. So what is cost of goods sold? Cost of goods sold is also known as COGS, C-O-G-S. You'll see that abbreviation on a lot of things, tax reports, bank financial statements, different things that people are asking for. But COGS is really cost of goods sold. So what that means is COGS are the direct costs of producing the goods sold by a company. So in your world, that to me would be the ingredients used, perishable and non-perishable, and any supplies that go with the product. I love cake, so I'm going to pick on cake. So that would be everything it goes into to make the cake, the icing, the decorations, and probably the round board. If it's a round, layer cake, the round board that goes on. If it's a sheet cake, the pan that it goes in, that goes with the customer. Now, cost of goods is not a reusable sturdy baking pan, okay? That's equipment. But anything that you are giving with the product that you're creating would be considered part of your cost of goods. So that could be the boxes. I think about some muffins or some cupcakes I got that had the cute little wrappers around them, those kinds of things. If you're making breads, it would be the bags that you put them in and the ties on the bags, those kinds of things. All of those are a cost of goods. And you need to know what that amount is per product sold. And that's a lot of work. But that's the only way you can truly know what your cost of good inputs are. Now, keep in mind that when you're doing this, that is not including any of your other inputs, your time. Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. But that is cost of goods, and that's imperative. And if you are making cupcakes, you need to know what your inputs are per cupcake so that you know you are charging enough per cupcake to be profitable. So let's talk about what other expenses have to be accounted for out of the revenue that we've collected. So we collect our revenue, then we take away our cost of goods. But now we have all of these other operational expenses that we have to consider as expenses that come off the bottom line and what is left at the bottom for profit or for owner compensation. All right. So what are those other costs? All right. So they're any costs that are incurred by your business and are transacted through your business bank accounts or business credit cards. All right. And they need to be tracked. You can't just lump everything together. Here again, how can you evaluate if you're paying too much for marketing if you just have all of your expenses put together? Think about the kinds of marketing that you're doing. Think about the kinds of other expenses you have. Make sure we break them apart. So some of the standard, when I thought about the cottage food world again, I thought about some of kind of what I would think are standard expenses for your business. And if you have other things, please chime in and let me know. But marketing or advertising. So if you're on the program at the local school for ball games, that's marketing. If you have signage, if you have business cards, things like that, that's all marketing. Professional fees. So what are professional fees? That would be your tax advisor. And something we did not even discuss today, because it's a whole nother ball of wax, are, legal advisors. What is your business structure? My assumption, and I hope I'm not wrong, but most cottage food operators are operating as sole proprietors. There are other business legal structures available to you. They do have more of an expense, but they do offer more legal protections in the case of liability and litigation. And if we're honest with ourselves, we are generating consumptive items. People are eating these things, and we are at higher risk of litigation than a lot of other industries. If you knit and make baby blankets, yep, you have risks, but not nearly as much as creating a product that people eat and could react to, or, you know, something inappropriate is inside the product that we're not aware of and can cause harm. So professional fees, there's going to be things there. Bank fees. Often if you do have your federal EIN, sometimes a business bank account will have a fee on a monthly basis. I've seen it as low as $2, but I've seen it as high as $20 per month. Some of them don't have any charge. It just depends on your facility. But the other thing would be overdrafts, NSF checks that you receive from customers, or you know, checks that you write off your bank account that, you know, aren't covered and are not only overdrafts, you know, but they return those checks. Business insurance. I'm hoping that every single one of you has business liability insurance. If you do not, after you talk to a tax advisor when you get off this training today, call someone and get business liability insurance. Okay. Licenses and certifications, whatever things you need to do during the year to keep up your skills or to keep your license with the state of Minnesota or with any other entity that you do business, those are business expenses. Office, printing and postage. So office expenses would be, you know, the paper that you use to generate invoices, the ink that it takes, paper clips, staples, envelopes, anything that is an office expense for your business. Okay. Small tools. You know, what if I think about the big equipment that you guys probably have, it would be, you know, the cooking source, so the oven or the cooktop. But then there's going to be small things that you have: spoons, spatulas, scrapers, knives, those kinds of things. Those things all need to be replaced regularly, right? The more you use them, the more they're going to get broken. So small tools, when you replace those are definitely a legitimate business expense. Sorry about that. My phone's ringing, but I'm going to ignore it. Equipment repairs and maintenance. You know, you have ovens and you have mixers and those kinds of things. If you have to pay to repair them, that's also a legitimate business expense. Okay. General supplies. So what are general supplies? General supplies would be things like paper towels. I would consider most of these things disposable items, right? Paper towels, cleaning supplies, just general things that you need. Tape, maybe. You tape your boxes closed. Little stuff like that. That would be general supplies for your business. And if you have a question about something and whether it's a legitimate general supply, that's what your tax advisor is for. Dues and subscriptions. So if you're a member of the National Cottage Food Industry organization, I don't know, I would assume there's one. If there's a fee for that, that's a legitimate deduction. If you pay a fee for a state or a local group, if you're a member of the chamber, any of those kinds of things that are educational and supportive of your business, those are legitimate business expenses. Training and education, you know, like I said, I'm going to keep picking on the cake people because I love cake, but you know, if you're going to go to a class to learn how to better manage your fondant use, that is definitely a training that you can attend and pay for, and the cost is a legitimate business expense, and you want to keep track of all of the things associated with that. In that instance, it might not only be your tuition, but it might be a hotel and some food and other expenses related to that travel as well. Other tax deductions. I hope Jennifer's going to let me know if I'm getting close to running over time here, but
I'm watching the time. You got about 16 minutes.
Okay.
We had a couple of things here I'm going to talk about for tax deductions. Amy Camp says she had someone mention to me at a market that my lunch was a business expense. Is that correct? So like if you're at a market for the day, to which Caitlin replied, her tax advisor stated that if you require an overnight stay, that your lunch meals would be deductible, but that's a lunch but lunch at a market is not.
You want to talk to your tax people,
Mhm.
because those laws and rules change all the time. But
Yeah.
yes, those things very much sound right on point. I live in Southwest Minnesota, and we tend to think too much in the I'm married to a farmer, so I feel like I can say this, the ag world, where the end of the year, they're hurrying up and spending money so they don't have to pay taxes and everything's a deduction. Well, your tax people rely on you to do things honestly, so they rely on you to be educated to know what's legitimate, and you will bring things to them, and there are going to be some things that they say, no, you can't take that. But keep track of the things that you have a question on and call and ask. There's absolutely nothing wrong in calling your tax advisor and saying, you know what, I'm going to go 3 days to a farmer's market at the fair. What can I take for deductions? And it does matter sometimes if you drive back and forth. It sometimes matter if you spend the night. And don't be disappointed, but there's a lot of deductions that you can spend a certain amount, but anything over that is not allowable. There are limits as well. Okay. Unless your business is so large that you have a vehicle completely dedicated to your business, you do not use it for personal use ever. You're not going to have gas, automobile expenses, and those kinds of things. Your tax advisor is likely going to tell you keep a business log of the miles traveled, because you're not large enough to have a vehicle dedicated 100% for the business. I might be wrong in some instances, but overall that's pretty unusual. So keep a log of all your business miles traveled, the date you went, the purpose of the trip, and the round trip miles driven. It's always good that you have some sort of documentation with that as well. So a receipt for if you went to St. Cloud to purchase items, a receipt from St. Cloud on that date, is verification. Go ahead, Jennifer.
I was just going to wait till the end and bring this up, but Roberta just brought it up and talks about your electric bill. When it goes back to profitability and that type of thing, and wanting to make sure that you include your expenses and that type of thing, because I know, like, for example, he said she says she uses a dehydrator and it raises her electric bill by $100 a month, so I keep track of that increase and that type of thing. But yeah, that was something I was going to bring up. Just remember that the cost of, if you have natural gas or propane on anything, that's gone up. I notice a difference when I'm doing a lot of baking, because I use a lot more water, and in some places water's more expensive than others, and I can see a substantial increase, at least down here in Mankato. Kilowatt hours for your ovens. One person may have one oven. I run 3 ovens at a time because I'm fortunate enough to have a double wall oven and then just a regular stove oven. So yeah, even just keeping those lights on, those extra hours when you're working and stuff, it all adds up over a year's time. So make sure you're keeping track of that for an expense, and maybe try to put it back into the cost of the goods you're selling.
Yeah, the actual tax deduction, you want to talk to your tax people about what might actually be a deduction, because even if your light bill does go up $100 a month, that if you are operating out of your home, how can you justify to the IRS that $100 is solely dedicated to your business? So you want to talk to your tax people. The disappointing answer is probably, as far as a tax deduction, you probably are only going to get the at
Business use of the home,
working
yeah.
out of your home deduction, which is, I believe, I have it here at 1,500. That was the last I knew that it was. Might be different, but the space has to be, in that instance, the space has to be used exclusively for your business. And how many of us can say that about our kitchen?
Mhm.
Probably not many.
That many.
So Jennifer's absolutely right. Keep track of that difference and then work that back into your cost of goods sold.
Yeah.
Right.
You may not be
That's-
able to, you may not be able
a
to use it as
deduction.
a full business deduction by any means, but at least you're recouping that cost. You'll have to pay some, you'll have to pay some taxes on that, federal and state, but at least you're recouping that cost.
Yep.
And
No.
I know, our natural gas bill was huge last month.
Yeah, no. Yeah, and it's wonderful to be able to do this from your home and be able to work from home. I work from home. But the downside is that, there are some parts of that, you have to eat the cost. When I worked at an office, I guarantee that, my heat bill and my light bill was much less than it is now because I was gone, 10 plus hours a day, and I turned the heat down and the lights weren't on. I have a little space here going right now, girls. People, I should say, everybody. But that wouldn't go otherwise.
No. And you're going to want to check with your tax accountant too, especially like as we get closer and closer to retirement. I don't necessarily use a business deduction on it because on the use of our home so much. Even if I could, I don't know that I would, for the simple fact that when you go to sell your home, that plays into things as well. When you go to sell it, when you've used that business deduction, if you are doing business up to the day you leave, then all of those years back, it becomes a potential tax burden. It just depends on individual cases. But if you haven't been doing business for, I don't know how many years it is now, then you might be okay. But really, big thing is talk to your tax person about all of this.
Yeah. You're right, Jennifer. You can't say that enough. If you have a question, talk to your tax advisor. That's why you need that person. One of the other things, and I don't know in your industry how much of that can be, but if you buy big pieces of equipment dedicated solely for your business, there's the potential, maybe there's some depreciation that you can take as well. Tax deductions, I'm not a tax advisor. I'm not an attorney. I can't answer those questions. I just know from what my personal experience is working with clients and being a business owner that works out of her home. But always ask your tax advisor. That's why you need that person. Go ahead, Jennifer.
And we have about 8 minutes left, and I see you have probably 5 slides left. So
yep, we'll keep moving along here.
Sounds great.
All right, owner compensation. I want you guys to always be thinking about making sure you're building into the price of your goods compensation for yourself. Because if you're not compensating yourself, why? Why are we doing this if you're not able to compensate yourself? And when we are compensating ourselves, we want to make sure that we're taking into account all of our time inputs. So that's talking with customers on the phone for special orders, that's time. Research for designs, that's time. If we do a lot of farmers markets or things like that, our drive time to and from, our packing before we leave, our unpacking when we get there, our packing up before we come home, the time we spend there, we need to be thinking about all of those time inputs and being realistic with ourselves about how much are we compensating ourselves. If we do this because we love it, that's different. But if we think we're doing this to help the family and what we're generating is about $3 to $5 an hour for our time inputs, is that good use of your time? I want you to make sure you're thinking about that. If you're not compensating yourself now by a cash check or setting up an account for yourself at the end of the year, why? Are you putting money back into the business for future growth? Can the business not afford to compensate you right now? Is that because you have debt for the business? Or is it because We haven't really put in good thoughts into what the time inputs are. Or if you don't know, then I think it's time to schedule time with the small business development centers, and let's do an analysis. Let's do an analysis of your business and make sure we know what it's going to take for you to not only be profitable, but for you to compensate yourself. Okay. If you are compensating yourself, make sure you're setting aside funds to pay your self-employment, Medicare, FICA or Social Security, and your state and federal income tax. Also think about the long range. If you're young, it feels like you're going to live forever. But when you're 58, you finally realize that, you know what, I want to retire someday. Maybe not 100%, but I want to cut back, right? So are you planning for retirement? If you talk with your tax advisor, there's a chance that you could be reducing the amount of state and federal income tax you have to pay if you're putting funds into a qualified retirement account. So make sure you talk to that and get a tax and a retirement advisor. So there's 3 of them: a legal advisor, a tax advisor, a retirement advisor. You are a business owner, get advice where you need it and go to the professionals. Okay. Is your business ready for 2023? Ask yourself and know, can you produce a profit and loss statement? Do you have a balance sheet? Does your business cash flow? Do you have debt service capacity if you need to borrow money? Are you planning to grow? Can you provide sustainable income for your family? Are you providing any sustainable income for your family? Do you have a business plan? If you don't, you should have one. Every business should have one, whether you need to borrow money or not. You should have a business plan. Something down on paper. Here's where I am today. Here's where I plan to be tomorrow. Here's where I see myself in 6 months, a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. It sets benchmarks for the reality of how fast the world moves and how fast life goes. And it makes sure that we understand what it takes to be profitable. If you don't have a business counselor, again, the small business development centers would be happy to work with any one of you or all of you at no charge. And we will help you with as much as possible. What things are provided in each regions, of course, varies differently based on the skills of the counselors on staff. But I can guarantee from the Southwest Minnesota 18 counties, we would be happy to help you with any and all of these things. Make sure you have a tax advisor and a legal advisor at the very least, and also a retirement advisor, if that makes more sense for you. Questions?
Go ahead and unmute and ask questions if anybody has any.
Jennifer, this is Deborah. I was just wondering about what Pam just mentioned about business counselors in the Southwest area. If we might put, is that what you're putting up right there? Never mind. Now I see it. I see there's contact information for that. Thank you.
Yep, and then she has shared that with me as well. So Pam, will it be okay if I share this information on our website under resources?
Absolutely. So
And
if you don't know what counties, you can go out to the Minnesota deed website if you're not in the Southwest region and find out which region you're in and how to get a hold of your regional center. But the 18 counties of Southwest Minnesota, I've got those listed here. So Big Stone, Chippewa, Cottonwood, Jackson, Candy, Ojai, Lackaparra, Lincoln, Lyon, McLeod, Meeker, Murray, Nobles, Pipestone, Redwood, Renville, Rock Swift, and Yellow Medicine. Phew.
Shoot, that's a list.
Yep, that's the list, and we help people in all of those areas, and it doesn't matter how big or how small your business is. We're here to help, and there are no fees for our services. Here's my contact information. If you have any trouble, this is my email, this is my cell phone. I can't work with you individually until you sign up for services with the Small Business Development Centers. But if you're struggling to get things to work and you need my guidance, I'm happy to help. Or direct you to a resource. You know, we just can't share enough resources in our small communities, our small businesses. You are the lifeblood of our country. You
Fantastic. Oh, go
are
ahead.
important.
This has been a fantastic presentation, and I'm sure we'll be reaching out to you lots more, looking at the counties that you serve. We do have quite a few members that live in those counties, so I'm sure you'll be getting phone calls, and I will probably be contacting you again to see if maybe you're interested in doing anything with a balance sheet or profit and loss, profit and loss statements or something.
Okay. All right.
Fantastic. Thank you so
Well,
much.
If there's no more questions, I'll let you guys go, and I hope you have a good rest of your session today.
Thank you so much for being with us, Pam.
Wonderful. It was my pleasure.
Yes, fabulous. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Too. Well, that was a lot of
voila.
information.
Yeah, a lot of really good information.